With the announcement of Dorney Park's new dive coaster, we've started to see a trend with B&M coasters. B&Ms have gone from monster, once-in-a-generation editions to smaller, almost standard editions. Okay, they're not standard, but they're not the monumental rides that they once were. I mean, if we're seeing Six Flags and Dorney by these rides, they ain't anymore, I'm just being honest. But why? Why has arguably the top-of-the-line manufacturer shrunken their most popular model? Well, that's exactly what I'm going to be talking about today in this video. No dilly-dallying in this one. I'm going to answer why B&Ms are getting smaller. But before I do that, we have to take it back for some context. Back in the 90s and the early 2000s, B&M was on top of the coaster industry, building the biggest and baddest, most innovative rides that money could buy. They built monsters like Riddler's Revenge, Kraken, and Tatsu that still tower over their skylines today. Even their smaller models like inverts were cracking 200 feet. 200 feet for an invert. Basically, what I'm trying to tell you is that if you were going B&M, you were going big. There were no small B&Ms, it was go big or go home. And this continued into the 2000s and the 2010s. They were the go-to manufacturer for hypers and even tried their hands at a couple of gigas. These were reliable, high-capacity, and crowd-pleasing rides. Every park wanted one, but not every park could have one. And that was for one reason: price. B&M makes some of the most expensive rides in the market, and obviously the bigger you go, the more expensive it is. Oh, Coastoons, that's why they're building less rides and smaller rides. It's just less expensive. No, shut up. That's not the entire answer. Let me finish. Now, price was a big factor. After Six Flags collapsed in bankruptcy in 2009, B&M really became a novelty that they couldn't afford, and that was kind of a problem. Six Flags was a huge customer, and mostly because of their irresponsible spending, but also because they had the most parks. They literally have the parks with the most B&Ms on the planet, so losing Six Flags was a huge hit for B&M, but obviously not big enough to be too affected. The real issues came with the pandemic. When the world shut down, so the theme parks and all that revenue that was supposed to be coming in for 6 months or a year in some cases was nowhere to be found. And that slowed down additions, still kind of to this day. The rides that were supposed to open in 2020 got pushed back to 2021 and sometimes even 2022. Aquaman was 2023, the thing like literally just opened. But since those rides have opened, we've seen a significant decrease in quantity and size of new additions. Before COVID, SeaWorld was adding huge new rides to every single one of their parks. I'm talking Intamin Blitzes, RMC Hyper Hybrids, and large-scale GCIs. But post-COVID, the additions have not only slowed down, but have gotten exponentially less ambitious. Busch Gardens Williamsburg went from getting this crazy launched double spike giga coaster to Dark Coaster, a family indoor coaster. Whoopee. But a little while ago, we got the announcement of Iron Menace, which, what is that name? Menace? Really? I just kind of want to make this public service announcement for all parks. Please stop naming rides a metal and then like an adjective. I don't know if it's exactly an adjective, but like it's a way of describing a thing, I guess. It's just so played out. Like so many parks have a name like this. Steel Vengeance, Iron Menace, like Steel Force is literally in the same park. Iron Menace is just like really not a good name. It's kind of corny and it doesn't roll off the tongue at all. I'll talk more about Iron Menace later, but the main thing I want to point out is the size. The drop is only 150 feet, which is starting to become a trend with dive coasters. When dives first came out, they were mostly all 200 feet. These were hyper coasters with a crazy first drop and inversions. We all kind of saw the peak of dive coasters with Yukon Striker and Valraven. These were the biggest we'd ever see these rides get, and they had full layouts after the drop. I thought that meant dives were going to keep going in this direction and filling out more and become less only about the drop. But then Emperor came along and it was 150 feet. Now, I sort of wrote this off because SeaWorld San Diego has a height limit that this couldn't break, so I kind of thought they were just compensating or, working with the park on this one. Plus, the elements seem tighter and snappier, so I thought this would be a unique one-off for dives. But then we got Dr. Diabolical, which is also 150 feet, and it used the exact same design language, steep drop, and tighter elements after that Emperor had. It's a short layout and a short drop, but again, I thought this was just because Six Flags is broke and can't afford a bigger coaster. 2 exceptions not making the rule. And now we have another Adorney. These smaller dives are becoming the norm for these parks, and yeah, it's because of price, but there also is another reason: oversaturation. Pretty much every major park has at least one B&M, and most that do have more than one. And basically all of these B&Ms are monster rides from the 2000s, except the small dives I just mentioned before. There really just isn't a market for these kind of rides anymore. Most parks that would get a big one already have multiple. B&M is expanding their portfolio to be more flexible and fit more parks because no, Dorney is never going to get a 200 plus foot multi-inversion dive coaster. It's just not in the budget. This is the biggest thing that they can justify, so B&M compromised. A similar thing happened to hypercoasters, building 150 foot mega coasters for LaRonde and Universal Studios Japan, but the hypers are a special model because their appeal really is strictly their size, so they did revert back to the 200 plus feet, but dives might not do that. Dive coasters will still be appealing at 150 feet because that drop is so eye-catching. And honestly, if you make it steeper than 90 degrees, which most of these smaller ones have, then these smaller dives might be even more marketable than the big ones. But I think the bigger question we should ask is, will this start to happen to other models? Will wings start to shrink and inverts and yes, even hypers? Well, the answer is it kind of already has. The Surf Coaster is, yeah, a brand new model, but it's really not. It's B&M fixing their stand-up model and trying to revive it, and one of the changes they made was changing the intensity and the size of the layout. Gone are the ankle-crushing 7 inversion stand-up monsters, and instead we have a stand-up coaster that seems more graceful than intense. I know it's not the same as building smaller dives, but they did indirectly make their stand-up smaller and tamer. Now, they haven't done the same with inverts or hypers, but I could definitely see them doing it with wings. They already have kind of done this with wings. There's a 60-foot wing coaster in England. Mandrill Mayhem at Chessington Park is only 65 feet, and it still looks like a good ride. The thing about wing coasters is they're incredibly flexible, even more so than dive coasters. First of all, they can have launches like Thunderbird, which eliminate the need to have a big first drop, but they can also be themed around, which is exactly what's going on with Mandrill Mayhem. You can sacrifice some of the thrill factor if the ride is really well themed, and we've seen wing coasters themed time and time again. I think wings are the next coasters up to shrink, and that's a good thing and a bad thing. It's good because we'll get more wing coasters that might even be well themed to compensate for the size. That means cooler near misses and just more effort from the parks in general. But the downside is we won't get the spectacle. I feel like one of the best things about wing coasters is the fact that they're just beautiful rides. They really have a presence when they're soaring above you, but you won't really get that if they're smaller. So like everything in life, there's a give and a take. Personally, I like big wing coasters. I feel like they add so much to the skyline, but parks don't really care what I like. It's about what the money likes. And the money likes smaller. Okay, I want to finish off this video by just talking about Iron Menace, just kind of breaking down the layout. I'm done with the whole shrinking theory. In summary, I was basically saying it's too expensive post-COVID, and all the parks that were getting big B&Ms already have one. Oversaturation, basically. Okay, done with that. Now I'm strictly breaking down Iron Menace for kind of like the second half of this video. I think it's a good ride. Like these other smaller dives, I think the layout after the drop is going to be good. But the whole point of dive coasters are the drop, and I feel like you're losing a lot by shortening it. It's like shortening a drop tower, but then making it spin around the tower. Like, yeah, it's cool and all that it spins, but that's not why I wrote a drop tower. Ride dives for the drop, or a drop tower for the drop, and the stomach dropping feeling. I don't care really how steep it is. And I also don't really care that much about the layout after. I was happy that Yukon Striker and Valraven were expanding on the layouts, but that was only because they had the drop nailed. They had a perfect 200 plus foot 90-degree drop. If you don't have the drop nailed, then what is the point of a dive coaster? It's just a mediocre looper that's kind of short. And this one's like really short in length, like shorter than most of the other small dive coasters. Like doesn't even have a second drop short. Obviously it's great that Dorney's getting a new large scale coaster, but I really wish they just gave it a little more. This seems like the bare minimum effort. There's really nothing here that excites me. Beyond 90-degree drop is cool, but now it's been done before. And the rest is pretty standard dive elements, just smaller. And it's not even like the good smaller where they get snappier because you're taking them faster. They're the same proportionally to the first drop as the big dives are, but the ride as a whole just is smaller. I don't know, I kind of just expected more. We had that crazy rumored gravity group shuttle thing, but instead we're getting this very standard ride from a very standard model. I'm sure the people of Dorney are gonna like it, but for me personally, I'm not making a trip out there for this ride anytime soon. And yeah, that's pretty much just gonna wrap up this video. Let me know in the comments what you think about Iron Menace and B&M's new direction as a whole. Thank you guys so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.